I just think first it's really getting clear on what are the things that light me up? What are the things that fuel me? What do I value as women and as moms? We just give so much. And it's really important to not lose ourselves and our identities in all of the different roles we play.
Welcome to the SheSpeaks podcast, a podcast created to elevate women's voices across diverse backgrounds on topics impacting women. I'm your host, Aliza Freud, founder and CEO of SheSpeaks. Each week, I have a conversation with a woman expert who shares her best how-to advice on a topic so we can learn how to better do that one thing from a woman who's been there and done that. Our hope is that these conversations help you feel more inspired to speak up and be heard in your own life and work. Now, on to the episode. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're all having a great week so far. So today's episode is one that I think you're really going to appreciate if you're somebody who has spent time in your life thinking on one thing and then decided, you know what, I'm not interested in doing that thing anymore. And I want to do something different. How do I figure out what that different thing is? And I think today's guest is a great example of somebody who kind of led that life. Michelle Grosser is my guest today, and she's a former law professor who changed her life to become a successful podcaster and a motherhood coach. And what we talk about today, and through Michelle's own experience, we talk about how many of us, many women, spend a lot of time and a lot of our lives doing the things that we think we should be doing. But ultimately, you then start to feel like, wait a second, is this really fulfilling me? And then how do you make a change? So let's say you're someone who feels like you've spent a lot of time doing something, but it's no longer serving you. It's no longer making you happy. How do you go through the process of determining what you really want to be doing, not necessarily what you've done in the past, but what you really want to be doing, and then going and pursuing that? And then one of the things that I thought was really interesting during our conversation is Michelle talks about the seasons of our lives and how we have different seasons in our lives. So what something might serve us during one part of our life, but then we get to a different part and that thing no longer serves us, which is why so many of us end up deciding that we want to make changes. So I found this conversation to be so incredibly interesting as somebody who has made shifts in my own life. And I think it'll be interesting for you to hear Michelle's perspective, how she breaks down the process of thinking about what it is that you want to be doing and pursuing it. So we're going to jump into it. Here we go. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am very intrigued by your background. You have had a career in law, you were a law professor, and then you've turned that to a different profession as a coach and a podcaster. So how did this all come about?
Yeah, it's an unusual journey for sure. I think I was just one of those people growing up that was really good at like checking the boxes and doing all the things, all the shoulds, right? Like I should be the top of the class, and then I should go to this kind of school, and I should get this kind of job, and then I should have this kind of family and this kind of house and all of these things. And I did that for so long, I think, without realizing that it had very little to do with me and my desires and my values and my passions. So I did. I went to law school, and then I worked at a big firm. Then I was a law professor, and then I opened my own practice for 9 years. And I'm still practicing law a little bit, but during the pandemic, I think like so many people, I had this like 3 a.m. aha moment that just jolted me out of my bed. And I was just realizing so many women, particularly moms in my circle, were just at their wits' end and trying to balance work in a new way and motherhood in a new way. And their marriages felt like they were on the rocks, and everyone's trying to homeschool. And it's just a lot. And I don't really know the origin per se, but just this tug of like, you're meant to be a part of the solution here. Like you have a gifting and a calling that's way more aligned with encouraging and resourcing and equipping women, like high achieving, ambitious moms that want to do all of the things, but just aren't feeling like they're resourced well enough to be able to do so in a way that feels healthy and graceful and not just scattered and frantic. So I just dove off the deep end and started coaching and got certified as a master coach and put in hundreds of hours of practice and really opened that practice. So now I'm using both sides of my brain, I think, so differently. So much of this emotional stuff and then so much of this logical law stuff. But that's been the journey and it continues.
I love that. I love that you have a story where you share that it's this evolution, but your origin is you said you really focused on all of the shoulds. I mean, it is such an interesting thing that a lot of us deal with, right? We are raised and we think, "Oh, this is what I should do." How does one figure out that maybe they're meant to do something else?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a question a lot of people search for. And I think it's really becoming acquainted with who we actually are and our
Mhm,
authentic self. And I think so
mhm,
much of culture, mom culture, Western culture, we're so disconnected from our intuition. We're so disconnected from our values. We're so disconnected from our desires and needs. Heaven forbid we actually express those needs or those desires or those passions. I think oftentimes that's seen as maybe irresponsible or I don't know. So I just think first it's really getting clear on what are the things that light me up? What are the things that
mhm,
fuel me? What are the things that I could talk about over and over? What do I value? What does that look like for my life and for my family, not just with my work? And then once you have that clarity, then you can make choices, right? Because awareness always precedes choice. So then
mhm,
we have that information. I think so many times we have these ideas of, well, it would look like that if I did this, right? Or that would
mhm,
suffer, or this would sacrifice if I did that. And
mhm,
really asking ourselves, like truly deeply, is that true? I think that's such a
mhm,
powerful question. Well, if I left my job in corporate law, I wouldn't be able to pay my mortgage anymore, so we'd have to move to a different house. Like, whatever the story
mhm,
is that true? And then taking accountability to go brainstorm all of the ways that you can make these things happen because I believe so deeply that it's available for all of us. We can all make an income and an impact and do all the things.
mhm.
Yeah.
You mentioned that a lot of this has to do with becoming acquainted with ourselves. If you had to give people one piece of advice that would help someone become better acquainted with who they are,
Yeah.
what would that be?
I love this question. This is the first thing I would offer you. Start a journaling prompt with wouldn't it be nice if? And set yourself a timer for 15 minutes and just let it roll. Like, wouldn't it be nice if my husband picked up the kids 3 days a week? Wouldn't it be nice if I made $150,000 this year? Wouldn't it be nice if I had this beautiful bathtub and could just soak in the bath after a long day? Nothing ridiculous, nothing, just right, right, and right, and right, and right. And then once you've journaled about wouldn't it be nice if, go back through it.
Mm,
And every single sentence that you wrote, ask yourself, is this mine or is this something that's been put on me? Is this something that's been put on me by my culture, society, my parents, religion, whatever it is that has an impact on who we are? Just really analyzing, is this mine? Is this truly something that would be nice for me? Or is this something that I've been led to believe? So I
mm,
think that can be really powerful. And then I think my second thing I would offer is find a values list, core values. You can just Google it and you can find hundreds and hundreds of values. And I would narrow it down to maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 values that are the most important to you. And then once you have those values, you structure everything else around it. So you structure how you show up in your family, in your friend circles. You structure how you show up in your work, the boundaries that you have around your workplace, or the demands that it has on your time or your physical, mental, emotional health. But then you have a compass, right? And then everything
mm,
you do has to fall into alignment with those 5 core values. And
mhm.
that is so it's not only powerful, but it's life-giving and it's affirming and it helps you decisions that might otherwise be very exhausting, all of a sudden come very clear when you have that barometer of, "No, these are my values," and everything has to line up with those values.
I love that because one of the things that I've noticed living life and coming to this point in my life is that
Mm,
when you have a strong understanding
mm,
of what is important to you, what those values are, it almost opens up possibilities as opposed to the opposite. I think some of us, we get so overwhelmed by, well, there's a lot of things I could do. There's a
Yeah.
lot of opportunity and possibilities. How do I decide?
Mm,
But when you know what truly is important to you, what
mhm.
those values are, as you said, it becomes the compass
Yes.
for other things. And I will say, just for myself,
Yeah.
I did not understand that as consciously for my personal life as I
Mhm.
did for my business life, my
Sure.
professional life. I first understood it for my professional life,
Mm.
and then later, more consciously
Mm.
for my personal life. And I
Mm.
wish that I had done it sooner for my personal life, because I understood the benefit in my professional life, but I wasn't conscious of it.
Yeah.
There's a consciousness of understanding these things that is so valuable.
It is, and it's that whole thing, like, success leaves clues, right? So, like, we do these things in our business and we're like you said, we're just not even conscious of it, but it is, it's really working, and it helps us by limiting that, it's actually expansive, right? And it allows us to
Mhm.
focus and flourish in those areas. And when we're not conscious to it, we can't grab the things in our professional life that are working, that are leaving the clues of success, and then implement them in our home life or our personal life or whatever. It's that awareness, I guess, that I was talking about that precedes all of the choices that we make about how we live and operate.
Yeah, another thing I'd love to delve into a little bit more, given your area of expertise,
Mhm.
is we go through seasons in life, is
Yeah.
just my experience, and I think the one of many of people, women I've talked to. So something that is great for us
Mhm.
at one point may not suit our needs and our values
Yes.
at another point.
Yep.
How do we recognize when that's happening? Are
Mhm.
there clues?
Yeah.
And then B, what do we do about it?
Yeah.
How do we reconcile that?
Yeah. So again, it's awareness, right? And I think that you're exactly right and you hit that on the head. So with the thing about seasons, it's so true. And I think it's helpful, at least for me, to equate the seasons in my life. So maybe it's seasons of motherhood, maybe it's seasons in your professional life, maybe it's seasons in your marriage or however it's showing up with the literal seasons. So there is like a spring in everything for all of us. And that's a time where it's full of expansive growth. It's really exciting. Like when I did this career change and started my podcast, like that was a spring. And I was just like growing and learning, and everything felt like bright and big and beautiful and exciting. And we've all had seasons like that in our life, right? Maybe it's the birth of a child, maybe it's a new job, whatever. It's a season of growth. And then you're in the summer, and in that summer, it's all about being disciplined enough, I think, to continue what was birthed in the spring. So that's where you become an expert, right? That's where you go through different experiences and you have the resilience from that spring to be able to make it through that summer season, but you're still feeling energized and you're still feeling like things are growing and moving and bright. And then you start moving into a fall. And that becomes more of a season of reflection. And it's when, literally the leaves change colors, but in our lives, these are periods of transition. These are periods maybe where you are leaving something and starting something new. You're becoming an empty nester, or whatever it is, but understanding that's the season that you're in can prepare you to focus on the things that you need to focus on in that season and then prepare you for the next season. So in this case, you'd be preparing yourself for a winter, and a winter is a season of hibernation. It's a
Mm,
season where maybe you're taking a lot of time to be introspective. It's a time of journaling. It's a time of preparing and storing away. It's a time of just being alone in silence and solitude. But what you're doing during all of that time is you're building the strength that you're going to need for your next spring, because that
mm,
spring, right, requires so much energy. You need to be resting in the winter. And then it's just cyclical and it happens over and over. And when we can become aware of the season that we're in and not try to bypass it, because I think that's where we get stuck, right? We're like, oh, this feels so uncomfortable. Like it feels so stuck. These things aren't happening, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you're in a winter. And when
mm.
you can know what you have to do in a winter and embrace it and learn what you're supposed to be learning in your winter, then I promise you're going to move to your spring.
Mm.
And I don't know, that's been helpful for me to kinda try to figure out, "Okay, what season am I in? Why does this feel off? What am I supposed to be doing here? What am I supposed to be preparing for my next season?"
How do we think about when you were talking earlier about these emotions, and you mentioned just now the seasons? How do we handle feeling stuck?
Mm,
Because we talked a little bit about the pandemic and
yeah,
how many of us had to shift in terms of our how things were working within our households.
yeah,
Also, just being truly stuck, like you couldn't go
yeah,
places, you were
confined,
literally
yeah,
stuck where you were. But I do think that there are other times in your life that have nothing to do with the pandemic
yeah,
where you can feel stuck.
sure,
What advice do you have for women who are like, I know I'm unhappy, or I know I need to do something else, but
yeah,
I can't think of what my passions are. I can't
mhm,
think, I'm just stuck.
yeah.
How do you move through that?
Yeah, as you say that, the 2 things that kind of come to mind for me are accountability and perspective. So I think the first one is maybe just taking an account of what part of this stuckness have I brought on myself? What part of it is me just living in fear? What part of it is me refusing to take action because I'm scared or I'm living in this spiral of the what ifs? What part of this is just decisions that I've made that I'm just like running around the same mountain over and over because of whatever reason? What are the boundaries that I've not put in place that I know I need to put in place? Where am I staying, still when I know I should be moving? And maybe where am I moving where I know I should be staying still? So I think there's an accountability factor there. And then with the perspective part of it, I think it's a reflection on if I feel stuck here, like, what is this trying to teach me? And I think sometimes we feel stuck because we're actually not ready for the next phase. We're not ready for that next step or that next season. And it
Mm,
feels really stuck because we're not sitting in the lesson. We're not approaching it from a place that's allowing us to learn what it is we need to learn in that lesson so we can move through it and move on.
mm. Oh, wow. That is a really interesting point
Mm,
about what you were just saying about perspective, because it's making me also think about something else that we've talked a lot about on the show, which is this concept of, as women, we do beat ourselves up a lot,
yes.
and we can be very difficult on ourselves, and our we start to develop that voice in our head, and
Yeah.
it becomes, you tell yourself over and over again that you're disappointed with yourself, or you're
Yes.
angry at yourself, or you're whatever it is. You start to believe that because
Yes.
that is what you're feeding your brain. That's what you're feeding yourself. And so, what we've talked a lot about too is just this concept of giving yourself grace and treating yourself with more kindness and understanding. How does that play into us getting ourselves unstuck or to the
Mhm.
place we want to be? This idea of giving ourselves grace and being kind to ourselves.
Yes, it's so important. It's so important. And I love that you brought that up because I think that's one of my favorite things to talk to moms about, especially because it's so rampant. We have this inner critic, or we have the mom guilt, or we have all of these
Mhm.
things chirping in our ear. And I think how it relates to being stuck and how it relates to the way in which we think about ourselves and speak to ourselves is that if we change it to a place of compassion, this is what happens. So let's say we have this inner critic coming in or this guilt coming up because we snapped at our kids or we had to work late and we missed the soccer game or whatever it is, right? And this all of a sudden that inner critic kind of chimes in and we hear it like, I'm not good enough, I'm not equipped, I'm messing up my kids, my boss isn't going to be happy and my husband's not going to be happy or whatever it is. And I think when we take a moment to readjust how we're hearing that voice. And we only do that from a place of compassion. So, what we can try to do is think about that voice that's coming through, whatever it is that's saying, the negative stuff coming through, and we give it the benefit of the doubt. And we ask ourselves, what is this critic's like highest intention? If I was to give it the benefit of the doubt, what is it trying to do? And a lot of times that inner critic is really trying to get us to be the best business owner we can be, the best
Mm,
mom we can be, the best woman we can be, the best friend we can be. It's really trying to protect us and make us motivate us. And I think that when we then thank it and we're like, okay, I thank you for that. That's compassion. I hear you. I hear that you're trying to bring me forward and higher and help me do better. And in a compassionate way, like, hey, let's approach this from a different angle. Yes, I do want to be a better business owner. I do want to be a better mom, but maybe instead of coming at me with the guilt or all the shoulds or all this self-talk that feels really negative and condescending and patronizing, maybe you give me a word of encouragement next time, or maybe you come through as my cheerleader next time. And all of that is just approaching all of the things that we do. We hold so much and we care so much that when we allow ourselves to extend and receive, a lot of it's work around receiving worthiness, receive the compassion from ourselves, just extending that grace, I think allows us to see ourselves and all that we're holding, all that we're trying to do in such a different way.
yeah.
Because we're all doing the best we can. It's just the truth. We're all doing the best we can with the resources that we have, the information that we have in that moment.
Yeah. And I think too, I love that you brought up journaling earlier as one of the important elements of just understanding what's going on with you. How do you get in touch with what you want in life? How do you get in touch with what's important? I do think that sometimes we are so much in motion
Yes.
that we don't stop to take the time to get in touch with what's going on with us. And journaling allows you to do that. I can't tell you for me how much it's been a transformative experience. I had a guest on the show pretty recently, Candace Nelson, who is the founder of Sprinkles Cupcakes, and she's been on a lot of Food Network, a lot of TV shows. She's just a very successful person. And when we were talking about the value of journaling, she said, I often don't know what I think until I write it down. And I
Mm.
thought that was such a beautiful way to say it. Sometimes you put something down on paper and you say, oh, wow, I didn't know that's what I was even thinking.
Yeah, I agree. I know for me as a, like, type A go-getter, so
Mhm,
often have to remind myself, like, I am a human being,
mhm,
not a human doing. And
mhm,
journaling slows you down like that, where you do have to take a moment to like reflect, and it activates different parts of your brain that bring forth
mhm,
emotion. And then the other thing about, and I think that's so beautiful about the journaling, the other thing I love about journaling too is that you have a record. So you can go back and see, man, I was so anxious about this a year ago. I was so worried about this. And look how it's worked out every single time.
yeah.
And that can help us, right, as we move forward through
Mhm.
new obstacles because life keeps on lifing. It never stops. Journaling, man, what a tool. What an underrated, underused tool, I think.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the systems that you set up to give you more time and energy and freedom. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done on that front?
Yeah, so I think this has been an evolution, especially you want to talk seasons, like having really young, having no children, then really young children, and now they're school age. So it's just different availability in my capacity, my time. One of my favorite daily practices is just daily habits, right? So waking up early, I wasn't always an early riser, but man, in the last few years, and I don't think this is going to necessarily work for everyone. There's probably people listening. They're like, no, don't tell me to wake up early. But waking up really early and specifically waking up before my children wake up is the best way to start the day because I
Mhm.
have time by myself with my journal to really get myself right before I have to pour into anyone else, to pour into myself, to reflect, to set the intentions for the day, to make sure that my calendar is aligned and I know what I'm going to focus on today the minute I get in the office. So that alone time before my kids wake up is one of my most powerful practices, I think. And the second thing I like to do is that I try to have a little checklist to do something for my mind, my body, and my soul every day. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's one of the three takes half an hour and the other ones take 30 seconds, but just something. Sometimes it's just like stopping working and walking around the block for 15 minutes. Sometimes it's making a sandwich for my husband and having lunch with him. Sometimes it's calling a friend or calling my grandmother, reading a book that's not a children's book with a hardcover, like reading something that's for me.
Mm,
But just making sure that I'm nurturing these different parts of myself
mhm,
daily, because as women and as moms, we just give so much. And it's really important to not lose ourselves and our identities in all
yeah.
of the different roles we play. So that's been
Mhm.
really helpful for me.
I love that. And because you work with so many moms, talk to so
Mhm.
many moms, what are the things that you're hearing from them most often?
A lot of guilt, a lot of that mom guilt. Sometimes it's thrown around as this cliche term or something, but women really struggle with it,
Mm,
especially working women. I think they feel like it's hard to ever be where their feet are. You're at work and you're thinking about home. You're at home and you're thinking about work. You're constantly being pulled in a million different directions. Sometimes it feels like you can't do any of it
mm,
right or well enough or how you'd like to because you just don't have the capacity. So I see a lot of guilt, and the thing about guilt is that there's two different types of guilt. And there's productive guilt, which I think is good for us and that we actually need to experience it, because that's the kind of guilt where we've done something that doesn't feel like it's aligned with our
mhm,
values and how we actually wanna be operating and showing up, right? So that's
mhm,
whatever, the white lie or snapping at your husband or however
mhm,
that's showing up, right? So that's the guilt that, like, actually pulls us to take accountability and make amends and try to do better next time, and that's a beautiful, productive guilt, and it's necessary, and if you're
mhm,
feeling that, it's just prompting you to do something that you know you need to do, right?
mhm,
To be in integrity. And then there's that unproductive guilt, and that's the kind
mm,
of guilt that a lot of women carry, and that's the guilt of
mhm,
my house doesn't look like Pinterest, and my kid's not having the birthday party with
mm,
whatever, all the characters and everything color coded, and I don't have this kind of job, and there's something going on here, and it's that kind of guilt. There's only one way through it, and in
mm,
my opinion, it's forgiveness, and it's either forgiving someone else or most of the times forgiving ourselves for not being or doing or whatever we think or thought we should. It's the shoulds, right? We should be showing up and really coming to a deep understanding that our kids don't need perfect parents. No one is doing all of the things like we
mm,
assume or think that they are. And like
mm.
you were mentioning earlier, just extending ourselves so much grace and compassion.
Yeah. When you're talking about the types of guilt, I was thinking to myself that it took me a long time to
Mhm.
recognize that there was no prize, there's no reward for feeling that thing.
Yeah.
There's and it's not exactly the guilt necessarily, it could be a fear or
Mhm.
a frustration or whatever. And when I came to the realization, what was
Mhm.
the use of feeling that thing? And I think it was because you were differentiating between the productive guilt and the unproductive guilt.
Mm.
I started to think you have to start to discern for yourself some of these things in terms of what is going to be useful
Yes.
and what is not useful. Because
Yeah.
I think we spend a lot of time as women caught up in things that don't serve us.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And just the process of understanding what is going to serve us and what does fuel us versus the things that are there but do not really are not useful. And that's
Yeah.
a hard process but it's one that I have found can be incredibly useful, but it's all connected. These things that we're talking about.
It's all connected. Yeah.
Yeah, it
And we can
really
only really have an awareness about which of our patterns are serving us or not serving us anymore when we slow down enough to actually reflect on it and take that
Mhm,
accountability and ask ourselves, like, okay, I've been doing this for 30 years or 20 years or
mm,
10 years, but is it still serving me? Is
mm,
this still in my best interest? Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
A non-negotiable. You
Mhm.
talk about non-negotiables. I think that's probably connected to the conversation we were having earlier about values and
Yeah.
understanding your values. But can you talk about first what is a non-negotiable?
Yeah.
And once you figure out what those are, how do you protect them?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, so the beginning of that and protecting your non-negotiables is just identifying what they are, and I think a good way to start doing that really is becoming very clear on what your values are. And in our home, we actually have, like, a family mission statement. Like, when you were saying earlier about things in your business where you're like, "Okay, this is working for me in my business," and then you have this aha moment, it's like, "Why am I not doing this in my home or my personal life?" And so our family has a vision statement or mission statement on the fridge, and that really identifies our family's values. And I think from that place, you can ask yourself, it's the bar against which you measure what you're gonna say yes to, what you're gonna say no to, how you communicate with each other.
Mm.
And it's not just things like we don't hit or respectful. It's also like we're a family that likes adventure and spontaneity, or we're a family that is very musical or active, or like whatever it is in your family that are your values and your identity. I think it can be really powerful. And what a beautiful gift for our children, too. I think it
Mm.
does so much to further their identity. And I think
Mhm.
that is so empowering as they continue to grow, to just have that security of this is where I come from and this is what we stand for. And then protecting all of that really comes down to having a good relationship and a comfort with the discomfort of setting healthy boundaries.
Mm.
Boundaries for ourselves and the things we stand for or allow, where we spend our time, our energy, our what we allow with our bandwidth, right? I think as
Mm.
women, we generally do a very poor job at protecting our bandwidth. So we're so quick to burn out. And then just protecting, I think, our time, our energy, our yeses and our nos, the people with which we decide to spend time, how much time we allow and access we allow to them. And the thing with boundaries that I've been really discovering is that I think for many years, I expected the people around me to raise their level of responsibility. I expected them to show up in a way that was either more respectful or with a better attitude or with a way that was more life-giving or positive or all of this stuff. And then you have this stark realization that I cannot control anyone except for myself. So when
Mm.
I have these people that feel like they're sucking everything, the living life out of me, and I can't change them, I have to lower my access. That's the control that I have.
Mm.
These boundaries, right? When you have these values to be like, okay, I have to make maybe some hard decisions here, but I know that it's in my best interest and it's what's serving me in this season.
A light bulb just went off as you were talking about boundaries,
Yeah.
Because I generally think of boundaries as boundaries on my time. Like those are the things I typically think. And I will be honest, for me personally, I have a little bit of a negative reaction to that
Mhm.
because I don't want to feel like I am being selfish with my time, meaning I won't give you
Yeah.
my time or whatever. But when you were just talking about boundaries, you said something really interesting that opened my mind to boundaries. You said you have to think about what you will allow.
Yeah.
And that opened my mind to think how I think about boundaries
Mhm.
because a lot about your boundaries and your non-negotiables, all of this is tied, as we said, to your values. And let's say a key thing for me is how people are treated.
Yes.
That is a key thing for me. That to me, when you
Mhm.
say, okay, that becomes one of my non negotiables, I won't allow someone to be treated in a way that I don't feel is respectful or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
The boundary is I won't allow that to be in my orbit.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's really powerful. And I think the thing with something like that, which I think is a beautiful example, because most people would probably have a similar boundary and agree, like, yeah, I don't want to be in a place where people are being treated or I'm being treated unwell, but we allow it. But we allow it. We're in a
Mhm,
relationship. We allow our mom to speak to us that way. It's an
mhm,
aunt, it's our husband, it's our
mhm,
children, maybe. And the thing about boundaries is that we don't really need them as much when we're well regulated and we're well resourced. Because when
mhm,
I'm taking care of my body and I'm getting rest and I'm taking care of my emotions and I'm doing all of these things, I'm generally going to make pretty good choices. I have my morals, I have my values, whatever, and I'm okay. But it's when we're dysregulated,
mhm,
which for moms, I think happens quite often.
mhm.
And it's like the phone's buzzing and the dinner's late and the homework's not done and all of these things are going on. And when we're in that dysregulated state, we'll grab the low hanging fruit.
Mm,
And it's the low-hanging fruit where we have to set boundaries when we're well and strong and feeling super, like, on it and
mm,
powerful and all of these things. Like, we set a boundary from that space to protect us from when we are feeling
mm,
low and anxious and depressed and overwhelmed and all of these things, because that's when we're vulnerable.
mm. Yeah. And that is a hard thing to do. It's a hard
Yeah.
thing to do, but I think for many people, the first step is an understanding of
Yes.
what that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about this search for understanding. And I think when you were talking before about the seasons, or when I mentioned that I think that there are seasons in our lives
Yeah.
where something serves us for a certain point, then doesn't afterwards. A lot of the thinking there for me is, how do I move between those periods of time?
Yeah.
And maybe at one period of time, achievement is really important. But then at another period of time, achievement is not the thing that's that important.
Yeah.
And then, but you don't want to get to that next season, which maybe that next season is all about understanding. That's not about achievement.
Sure.
You will get value from it, but it's a different season. And it's really about, how do you move through those with consciousness?
Yeah, and that's just transition, which is change, which is not what our brain is wired to want to do. It wants everything to be comfortable and safe and the same. So it does take a lot of consciousness to be like, okay, this is why I feel so much
Mhm.
resistance. Is it even resistance? Or this is why I feel so much resistance to this, but I'm making a conscious decision, like you're saying, to decide that this no longer serves me and I'm leaving it, or deciding that I'm going to push through this fear in a way that is healthy and not traumatic to get whatever that reward is waiting for me on the other side.
I love that. I am so grateful that you spent this time with us. I think you have a lot of really valuable insight and perspective, how to think,
Mhm.
all of that that you can share. What is the best way for people to follow you, to learn more about what you're doing, if they'd like to do that?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. You can find everything on my website, michellegrosser.com, and then I hang out on Instagram at michellegrosser.coach. There's information there in my bio for all of my links and all of my coaching information. We have a Facebook group called the Calm Mom Collective, and then you can listen to my podcast also. We have new episodes Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. It's called The Calm Mom, really a place resourcing ambitious, high achieving working moms in their journeys through overwhelm and anxiety and burnout and all the things. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you're an influencer or a brand that wants to work with us, please feel free to email us at info@shespeaks.com. Until next time.